Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing something a little different. We're going to be making a beret. This is not so much a tutorial as much as it is like a sew along with me kind of video. So here's a list of all the stuff you're going to need. You'll definitely need printer access to print off this pattern, as well as scissors and tape for putting the pattern together. And then for the actual beret itself, you're going to need about a ½ yard of a material of your choice. Wool and felt and fleece are usually what's used, but you can also do it out of cotton. You'll also need your optional trims, and then of course needle and thread and scissors and sewing pins. And if you're doing this by hand, it is doable by hand, but I do recommend doing this on the machine just to make things easier. But let's get started. So here we are. This is a Dr. Cause pattern. This pattern has a ½ seam allowance all the way around, and on this side of each piece you're going to see this little half circle. It says symmetry. That just means you're going to cut it on a fold. So Dr. Cause's first language is not English, it's Japanese, but essentially the way they mean it is symmetry, cut it on a fold. So essentially you're mirroring the piece, which, I mean, makes sense to me. But here I'm showing you guys on the circle piece, and now here we are getting started on that ½ seam allowance. This is going to be the middle of the beret, so not the band and not the flat circular part, but the piece that connects those two. So this is the piece that kind of gives it its main structure. So again, ½ seam allowances all the way through, and here I am actually also stitching a lining. I actually ended up not using the lining on my beret. You can line yours if you want to. I didn't like the way my lining was sitting, and I didn't like how it's stitched because this material is kind of difficult to work with. It's a very slippery satin. But again, you don't have to line your beret. You can if you want to, you don't have to. Next, you're going to want to press open that seam. I don't know where my iron is, so I wasn't able to do that, but I could at least flatten it out because it's fleece. And then you are going to start pinning the right sides of this together. So you're going to have that folded bit of seam there on the outside, and you're going to be pinning going in the same direction. Make sure your seams are all going the same direction, unless you want to go for that kind of inside out kind of look. I mean, I've seen pieces of clothing that have that, but essentially, yeah, you're just going to pin all the way around, and then we will sew this on a ½ seam allowance, and you'll see that in just 1 second as well. So here I am with my fabric scissors. This is just trimming that seam allowance down so that it reduces the bulk. Depending on your material, you may want to also do that. This is a polar fleece material, so it's quite thick, and if you don't do it, it's going to look kind of bulky. But if you used something thinner like a cotton, you probably wouldn't necessarily need to do this step. I just recommend doing it if you're using a thicker material like a wool or a fleece. The next step is going to be pinning and sewing down the band of your beret. Now on the piece for this band, there is actually a dotted line indicating that you're going to fold this piece in half, and you'll see that sort of in just a couple of minutes. But essentially stitch this piece shut, and then the next step will be to pin it down to the middle section of the beret. I'm not sure if there's like a name for that piece. I'm just calling it the middle section. But yeah, so you're gonna actually tuck it in order to make sure that the seam is also on the same side as your other seams. I ended up not trimming this seam allowance after I sewed it simply because I used that seam allowance to help stitch down the band at the end when I was closing it off. So I found it easier to remove the little sleeve holder on the sewing machine. I'm not really sure what to call that, but that part of the base that you can remove when you're doing sleeves. Because the opening is so narrow down at the bottom of a beret because it's supposed to go around your head. Not all machines do this, but most do. If your machine doesn't, I would say just very carefully go around. Make sure you don't end up stitching different sides together or stitching things down to other parts of the beret. Editing Sav here. So the video didn't catch me actually like closing off the band of the beret. I don't know why, it just for some reason it cut it off. All I did was a very simple whip stitch. If you're not familiar with how to do that, what you'll do is you'll take your needle that's threaded and you'll bring it through both the seam allowance and then the folded side of the band, essentially just bringing them together, and then you will just continuously do that in a loop, making sure that you keep it tight but not too tight, and you also want to make sure that you do not have any visible seams on the outside of the beret. You could theoretically do this on the machine. I just prefer to do it by hand, but however you want to finish your beret is totally up to you. And then after that, it's time to decorate it. So here we are at the final step, friends, which is just decorating. You can decorate yours however you want to, if you want to decorate it at all. I opted to decorate mine with just this little bow that was left over from when I made my winter coat. But yeah, I mean, you can use bows, you can use ribbons, however you want to decorate it, or you can just leave it plain. Totally up to you. All right, friends, so here's the final product. As you can see, I made this beret to actually go with my winter coat, which I made last year. This is actually made out of some leftover scrap material that I had from that project. So, of course, it's a perfect match. I'm very sad because it's starting to get kind of warm in Georgia, so it probably won't be feasible for me to wear this for too much longer. But if we have any future cold days this year, then I'll be very excited to wear it. If you guys do make this project, please tag me on Instagram or send it to me in a DM. I would love to see you guys' makes. And that's all I have for you for now. Feel free to give a like and subscribe if you want to see future content. And thanks so much for joining me. Bye, friends.